Most people walk through the grocery store every single week, and they never stop to ask themselves one simple question. Which of these things on the shelf will actually still be good in 5 years, in 10 years, even in 20 years? Nobody is talking about this. And once you know the answer, you will never shop the same way again. I started paying attention to this after a conversation with someone who used to manage inventory for a regional grocery chain. What they told me changed the way I stock my own pantry. Some of the most common items in your kitchen right now are basically immortal, and almost nobody realizes it. This is not about panic buying. This is about being the person in your family who already knows what to do while everyone else is scrambling later. Prices keep climbing, shelves keep shifting, and the people who quietly stock the right things now are the ones who stay calm later. Stick with me through this whole list because number 7 on this list surprised me more than anything else. It is sitting in almost every kitchen in America right now, and almost nobody realizes it basically lasts forever. Before we get into it, if you want more of this kind of insider breakdown, go ahead and subscribe now. I put out videos like this regularly, and you do not want to miss the next one. Let's get into it. Item number 1. Raw honey. Honey is where this whole obsession started for me. It just feels different once you know the truth about it. Archaeologists have found honey in ancient Egyptian tombs that was still perfectly edible after thousands of years. That is not an exaggeration. That is documented fact. The reason is simple. Honey has almost no water content, and that makes it nearly impossible for bacteria or mold to survive inside it. Food scientists have pointed to honey for decades as one of the only naturally occurring foods with an effectively unlimited shelf life, as long as it is stored properly and sealed away from moisture. That is not some fringe theory, that is basic food chemistry. I actually found a jar of honey in the back of my pantry that I had completely forgotten about. It had crystallized, it looked strange, and my first instinct was to throw it away. Instead, I looked it up, and it turns out crystallized honey is not spoiled at all. You just warm the jar gently in some hot water, and it goes right back to normal. So here is what you actually do. Buy raw honey, not the ultra-processed kind with added syrups. Store it in a sealed glass jar, away from direct sunlight, at room temperature. Do not put it in the fridge. That actually speeds up crystallization. This is one of those quiet little upgrades to your pantry that costs almost nothing and pays off for years. You are not just buying a sweetener, you are buying something that will still be useful long after most food in your house is gone. Item number 2. White rice. White rice is the kind of item people buy every single week without ever thinking about the bigger picture. When it is stored correctly, white rice can last 25 to 30 years. That number sounds almost fake, but it comes from long-term food storage data used by preparedness organizations and agricultural extension programs. The low moisture content and the way the outer bran layer is removed both play a role in that shelf life. Brown rice is a different story, since the natural oils in the bran layer cause it to go rancid within a year or so. That is exactly why long-term pantry stockpiles almost always favor white rice over brown. I did an experiment last year where I bought a large bag of white rice, split it into smaller mylar bags with oxygen absorbers, and sealed them up. A friend of mine who works in emergency preparedness walked me through the process, and honestly, it took less than an hour for a huge amount of rice. If you want to actually take advantage of this, buy in bulk when prices dip, and store it in an airtight container or sealed bags with an oxygen absorber. Keep it somewhere cool and dry, away from sunlight. A few dollars in supplies can protect a shockingly large amount of food. This is not about hoarding. This is about not being the person paying triple the price later for something you could have locked in today. Item number 3. Plain white sugar is one of those things that sits in every kitchen and nobody ever thinks twice about it. Because sugar has extremely low moisture content, bacteria and mold simply cannot grow in it under normal storage conditions. Food safety researchers generally list sugar as having an indefinite shelf life when kept dry and sealed. The only real enemy of sugar is moisture. If it gets wet, it hardens into a solid block. But even then, it is not spoiled. It is just harder to use. I actually had this happen to a bag of sugar that got a little humidity exposure in my cabinet. It turned into this brick-like chunk, and I assumed it was ruined. Turns out you can just break it apart or even microwave it briefly with a damp paper towel nearby, and it softens right back up. The move here is simple. Transfer sugar into an airtight container the moment you bring it home, instead of leaving it in the paper bag it came in. Store it somewhere dry, and it will genuinely last as long as you need it to. It is a small habit, but it protects one of the cheapest and most reliable staples you will ever buy. Item number 4. Pure maple syrup. This one gets confused with regular pancake syrup all the time, and that mix-up matters more than people realize. Pure maple syrup, the real kind tapped from trees, has a naturally low moisture content and a high sugar concentration, which gives it a shelf life of years when unopened, and a very long life even after opening if it is refrigerated. Regular imitation syrup, on the other hand, is mostly corn syrup and additives with a much shorter practical shelf life once opened. Vermont maple producers have talked publicly about how properly sealed and stored syrup can remain safe for years past its printed date, since the sugar content itself acts as a natural preservative. I switched from the cheap syrup to pure maple syrup a few years ago, mostly for the taste, but the shelf life difference is what really sold me on stocking it long term. Once opened, I keep mine in the fridge, and I have had bottles last well over a year without any issue. If you see mold develop on the surface after a long time in the fridge, you do not have to throw the whole bottle away. You simply skim the mold off the top and bring the syrup to a boil for a minute, and it is safe again. This is one of those upgrades that feels a little more expensive at first, but it lasts so much longer that it actually evens out. Item number 5. Dried beans. Dried beans are the unsung hero of every long-term pantry, and almost nobody gives them credit. Properly stored dried beans can last well over 20 years, based on data used by long-term food storage researchers. Like rice, the extremely low moisture content is what protects them from bacteria, mold, and insects, as long as they stay sealed and dry. The one thing that does change over time is cooking time. Beans stored for many years may take longer to soften when you cook them, but they remain completely safe and nutritious. I remember buying a huge bag of dried pinto beans during a sale a while back, more than I honestly thought I would use. I split them into smaller sealed containers, and I have been slowly working through them ever since, and the quality has held up completely. Buy dried beans in bulk when you see a good price, and store them in airtight containers with oxygen absorbers if you want maximum shelf life. Keep them in a cool, dark place and rotate older bags to the front so you use them first. Beans are cheap, filling, and nutritious, which makes them one of the smartest long-term investments you can make in your kitchen. Item number 6. White distilled vinegar. Vinegar is one of those products that quietly does double duty in almost every household, and it basically never goes bad. White distilled vinegar has an acidity level that makes it naturally hostile to bacteria and mold, which is exactly why it has been used as a preservative for centuries. Manufacturers generally note that its quality stays remarkably stable indefinitely when sealed properly. Over time, you might notice slight changes in color or a bit of cloudiness, but that does not mean it has spoiled. It is simply a cosmetic change, not a safety issue. I started stocking extra vinegar after realizing how many things I actually use it for beyond cooking. Cleaning countertops, descaling appliances, even laundry, it handles all of it. Once I saw how many uses it had, buying a couple of extra bottles felt like an easy decision. Store it in a cool, dark cabinet, sealed tightly, and you genuinely do not have to think about it again. It is one of the least glamorous items on this list, but arguably one of the most useful. Having a backup bottle or two means you are covered for cooking, cleaning, and a dozen small emergencies around the house. Item number 7. Cornstarch. This is the one I told you about at the beginning, and it really did surprise me. Cornstarch is almost pure starch with essentially no moisture, which means bacteria and mold have nothing to feed on. Food scientists generally treat it as having an indefinite shelf life as long as it stays dry and sealed. Most people only think of cornstarch as something to thicken a sauce once in a while, so it sits forgotten in the back of a cabinet for years. It turns out that forgotten box is actually one of the most stable products in your entire kitchen. I found an old box of cornstarch while cleaning out my pantry that I genuinely could not remember buying. Instead of tossing it, I checked it, and it was completely fine. No smell, no clumping, nothing unusual at all. Keep it in its original box or transfer it to a sealed container if you live somewhere humid. Beyond cooking, it is also useful for cleaning, deodorizing carpets, and even as a substitute in some homemade beauty products. It is a small, cheap item, but it is exactly the kind of thing that quietly earns its place in a well-stocked kitchen. Item number 8. Powdered milk. Powdered milk does not get nearly enough respect, and I say that as someone who used to avoid it entirely. When it is stored properly in a cool, dry, sealed environment, powdered milk can last well over 20 years, especially the non-fat variety, since the removal of fat content is what limits rancidity. This is widely cited in long-term food storage guidance from agricultural extension sources. The texture and taste do shift somewhat over extremely long storage periods, but it remains safe and usable for cooking and baking even when it is well past the printed date. A friend of mine who is deeply into long-term food storage convinced me to try it a couple of years ago. I was skeptical about the taste, but once I started using it in baking and cooking instead of drinking it plain, I honestly could not tell the difference. If you want the longest possible shelf life, look for it packed in nitrogen-sealed cans rather than the paper canisters sold at most grocery stores. It costs a little more up front, but the difference in shelf life is significant. It is not glamorous, but it is one of those items that can quietly solve a lot of problems if regular milk ever gets harder to find or afford. Item number 9. Instant coffee. For a lot of people, this next one hits closer to home than almost anything else on this list. Instant coffee, when sealed and stored away from moisture and light, has an extremely long practical shelf life, often many years beyond the printed date, because the freeze-drying or spray-drying process removes nearly all the moisture. Coffee industry sources have noted that unopened instant coffee stored properly rarely shows real quality loss for a very long time. Ground coffee and beans, by contrast, lose flavor much faster because of the oils they contain, which is exactly why instant coffee behaves so differently. I keep a couple of jars of instant coffee tucked away specifically for this reason, separate from the fresh ground coffee I drink daily. It is not about the daily cup. It is about having something reliable if supply or prices ever get unpredictable. Store it in a sealed, airtight container, away from heat and sunlight, and it will hold up for years without meaningful quality loss. A cool pantry shelf works better than anywhere near the stove. For a lot of households, coffee is not just a beverage, it is a comfort and a routine. And having a backup means one less thing to worry about. Item number 10. Dried pasta. Pasta feels almost too ordinary to be on a list like this, and that is exactly why it belongs here. Plain dried pasta, made from just flour, water, and sometimes eggs, has an extremely low moisture content, which allows properly stored pasta to remain safe and usable for well over 10 years, according to long-term storage data. Egg-based pasta has a shorter safe window than plain semolina pasta because of the added fat content. Over long storage periods, pasta can become slightly more brittle, but it cooks up normally and remains completely safe to eat. I actually did a small test with a bag of pasta that had been sitting in my cabinet far longer than I intended. Aside from being a little more delicate to handle dry, it cooked exactly the same as a fresh box and tasted no different at all. Buy plain dried pasta over fresh or egg-based versions if long-term storage is your goal, and keep it in a sealed container away from pests and moisture. It is inexpensive, filling, and incredibly versatile in almost any meal. A well-stocked shelf of pasta is one of the simplest ways to guarantee you always have a fast, filling meal on hand, no matter what is happening at the store that week. Item number 11. Salt might be the single oldest preservation tool in human history, and it is sitting in your kitchen right now, doing almost nothing for you. Salt is a mineral, not an organic compound, which means it does not spoil, break down, or support bacterial growth under any normal circumstances. Food safety sources consistently list salt as having an indefinite, essentially permanent shelf life. The only issue that ever comes up with salt is clumping from humidity, or, with iodized salt specifically, a very slow decline in iodine potency over many years. Neither of those things makes the salt unsafe. I switched most of my cooking to plain sea salt a while back, partly for taste, but also because I realized iodized salt was the only version on this list with any kind of expiration concern at all. Plain salt, stored properly, is about as close to eternal as food gets. Store it in a sealed container away from moisture, and buy a little extra when you see a good price, since it is cheap and it never truly goes to waste. It is also useful far beyond cooking, from cleaning to preserving other foods. Salt is proof that some of the most powerful pantry items are also the most overlooked ones. Item number 12. Liquor stored as a pantry backup. This last one is a little different from the rest, and it caught me off guard the first time someone explained it to me. High-proof distilled spirits like vodka, whiskey, and rum do not spoil the way food does, because the alcohol content itself prevents bacterial growth. Beverage industry sources note that unopened spirits stored away from heat and light can remain stable essentially indefinitely, with only minor flavor changes over very long periods. Beyond drinking, high-proof alcohol has practical uses around the house, from disinfecting to being a base for homemade extracts and tinctures. I did not think much about this until someone who works in the hospitality industry pointed out that bars routinely keep unopened bottles for years without any quality concerns at all. It made me look at the unopened bottle in my own cabinet a little differently. If you already keep spirits in the house, there is no rush to use them, and storing an unopened bottle in a cool, dark cabinet is essentially a zero-maintenance long-term asset. It is not something to stockpile aggressively, but it is worth knowing it will not go to waste sitting there. Sometimes the most interesting insider knowledge is not about what to buy more of. It is about realizing what you already own is more durable than you thought. Here is the pattern running through every single item on this list. Low moisture, high sugar, high acidity, high alcohol content, or a purely mineral makeup. Those are the exact conditions that make bacteria and mold unable to survive, and that is the actual science behind why these items last so long. Once you see that pattern, you start looking at your own pantry completely differently. You start noticing which items are quietly indestructible and which ones need to be used up quickly. This is not about fear, and it is not about filling your garage with supplies you will never use. It is about being a little more intentional the next time prices dip on something from this list. Buy a little extra, store it properly, and let it sit there quietly, working in your favor. Most people will figure this out eventually, usually after paying full price for something they could have locked in months earlier. You do not have to be one of them. If this kind of insider breakdown is useful to you, make sure you are subscribed, because I put these out regularly and you do not want to miss the next one. Drop a comment and let me know which item on this list surprised you the most. I read every single one. Thanks for sticking with me through this whole video. I will see you in the next one.